Παρακαλούμε να περάσετε στις θέσεις σας. Ευχαριστούμε. Please be seated. Thank you very much. Άφιξη του Πρωθυπουργού της Ελληνικής Δημοκρατίας Κυριάκου Μητσοτάκη. Arrival of the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Please remain seated. Παρακαλούμε, παραμείνετε καθισμένοι. Ευχαριστούμε. άφιξη του Προέδρου της Γαλλικής Δημοκρατίας, Emmanuel Macron. Arrival of the President of the French Republic, Mr. Emmanuel Macron.
Your Excellencies, President of the French Republic, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Iliana Magra, and on behalf of Kathimerini, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's very special event and to say, Monsieur le Président, bienvenue à Athens, kalos ήρθατε. We are gathered at the Roman Agora of Athens to reflect on the challenges that lie ahead for Europe's future, at a time that feels like a critical turning point in global history. What role will Europe play in the chapters to come? In ancient Greece and later during the Renaissance in France, dialogue was not merely a form of communication, but a cornerstone of democratic public life. Today, as democracy itself is being tested, such dialogue is more essential than ever. It is therefore an honor to introduce the speakers of this evening's discussion, the leaders of two countries that have helped shape Europe's past and that continue to play a central role in its future. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to invite you to the stage for a conversation that will be moderated by the Executive Editor of Kathimerini, Mr. Alexis Papachelas. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, I'm very glad to welcome you on behalf of Kathimerini. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for being here. Well, Mr. President, we rarely agree on things in this country, well, in every country these days, I guess. But one thing we agree on is that we're very thankful for your leadership and vision for Europe in these very difficult times. And also thank you because you keep up a great tradition of France being a very close strategic friend of Greece and of leadership in that respect. So we thank you for both of those. There's a lot of doom and gloom, as you know, about Europe. And you are very concerned about it. You say we have to stop sort of putting ourselves down. You said that in a speech. The thing is, are you worried that Europe is becoming a bit irrelevant these days? I mean, with what's going on in the world, especially now in the Middle East, do you have the feeling that we're becoming like an armed NGO or a think tank and, you know, we're becoming geopolitically irrelevant?
Thank you very much, not just for your words, but this welcome. And I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, dear Kyriakos, for this invitation, for this visit, and thank to all of you to be here. I think exactly the opposite. I think this very moment could be the European moment, and for several reasons. Number one, everybody in this world have a clear view that this is a world of disorder. Second, everybody sees that the number one power, the US, could be an ally for certain countries, but this ally is not so much certain. And nobody is totally sure if this ally is reliable. And third, we were used to live in an international order, and this international order is jeopardized by the two big powers. And what is the European Union? A place of predictability and reliability. And I think it has a lot of price. When we have partners, we are with them. And by the way, Greece and France, during the past few months, we acted day one with the Gulf countries when they were attacked by Iran. Yesterday, we were with the President of the European Council right after his trip to the Gulf countries, and he reported to the whole group that Greece and France were celebrated by UAE and other countries because the very first day we sent air defense system. We have our Rafale. We sent additional Rafale to protect the countries. We sent SAMT new generation, I mean the air defense system we have. And we contributed concretely day one to their defense. And I think you should not underestimate this point. So we are reliable, we are predictable. But more than that, I think when you look at the global picture, Europe represents, when you aggregate our capacities, a huge defense power. Europe represents a very relevant trade player. We represent something like 16% of global trade, the same as China. US is 15%. We are an actual financial place. And by the way, we improve the links between Greece and France during the past few months with an important merger on the platform of Euronext. And if you take all the different categories, we are at scale. The issue for us is to become an actual power, meaning to use our weight in the global order, to be respected, much more than we are today, and to contribute to actual solutions, and to be a trade power, not just to negotiate trade agreements, but clearly to impose reciprocity to the others, to impose European preference, we will probably revert on that, to protect our industry, and to be seen as, on the long run, a credible partner. But let me tell you that the moment where we are is a moment for the European Union and for the Europeans, because we are seen as respecting international law, being reliable, being predictable, and people are looking at the real weight we have.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Prime Minister, do you agree with this? And I have a follow-up question, which is, in order to be a great power, you have to have a strong economy. When you look at the numbers, there's a lot of concern in terms of GDP, investment, technology, and all this between the US and Europe. Is Europe doing enough to catch up?
Well, first of all, thank you for this invitation, Mr. Vagelas, and thank you, Emmanuel, for accepting to have this debate in this very, very unique location. And I think this debate and your question is particularly relevant at a time when, indeed, there is concern about the ability of the European Union to react to the changing sort of geopolitical tectonic plates. But I would agree with the President that this challenge also presents a unique opportunity for Europe, and we should not forget that Europe was forged through a series of crises. The progress of the European Union was never linear. You had periods of rapid change, and then you had periods where not much happened. And I do believe that this is a time when it is really an opportunity for us to step up on two fronts. The first one is put more substance to this concept of strategic autonomy. I would argue that France and Greece have been at the forefront of this discussion. And when you look at the defense agreement that was signed in 2021, it was essentially the first clear demonstration of what we mean by cooperating at scale. It was just the two of us at the time, and of course we will renew this agreement tomorrow. But I think there's a greater understanding that we need to take more ownership when it comes to defense. That means spending more, but also being smarter in terms of how we spend, achieving scale, while at the same time also encouraging our defense startup ecosystem to really flourish at a time when the theater of war is completely changing. And of course, the second challenge is strengthen our competitiveness. The Draghi report, which was read by all of us and applauded by all of us, I think presents a pretty accurate diagnosis of the problems, but also the opportunities that we have as a united continent. We're a big market, we're a big trade power. We can do much more at scale, but we need to address issues related to the single market. We need to address issues related to energy. We have a completely fragmented energy market. We need to be much more competitive when it comes to energy. We need to move from words to actions when it comes to the Savings and Investment Union, mobilize private capital in order to invest in our economy. And I would argue that at the European Council there is a general understanding that these are accepted principles. So now we need to move from agreeing to what we need to do to actually implementing these policies. And I think that the next years are really going to be make or break for Europe. And we had a discussion already today regarding the new budget. How much money can we actually commit to these ambitious goals? I think we will have a difficult discussion to convince maybe our more conservative, fiscally conservative friends in the European Union that we need to also mobilize European resources, not just national resources, to implement these goals. But let me conclude my first remarks by saying that we had a similar discussion back in 2020 when many countries, I remember Angela Merkel, was against the Next Generation EU until she changed her mind. And she realized that this is really the time to mobilize European resources to address these challenges. So I think we have our work cut out for us over the next months. But I remain quite optimistic that at this inflection point, Europe has a much more important role to play. And this is something which is understood both by the European Council. I think it's also understood by the European Parliament. It is understood by the Commission. But of course, Europe does not always move at the speeds that many people expect. But when it does move, it can move big.
Now, one of the criticisms I keep hearing is that Europe has become the super regulator of the world. Is this super regulation a way to defend European sovereignty, or is this also a method, by which basically you strangle innovation in this continent? And can you strike a balance?
This is exactly our challenge. I really believe that we over-regulated some sectors. And as Kyriakos just said, it's clear that we have a challenge, and in fact, it's scale, speed, and simplification. Scale, we have clearly to deepen the single market, because this is our strength. Speed, we are clearly too slow. And simplification, we have to kill all the hurdles we have, and sometimes we create. So it's clear that we over-regulated some sectors. We still have too many national regulations, and we have to improve that. And this is exactly one of the main conclusions of the Draghi report and the Letta report, and what we urged the Commission to put in place last year. And you have all this omnibus package. And by the way, a lot of us are doing exactly the same exercise at the national scale. But it's not sufficient, because you have as well smart regulation. And let me insist on that as well. We need regulation sometimes to preserve our own industry and our own capacity to produce. China and US, they do have regulation, but this regulation favors the national players. Most of the time, our regulation is a burden on the European players, and we are too naive and too open on the non-European one. This is why one of the challenges we have is to preserve the level playing field. So each time we put in place a regulation, we have to make sure that those who export towards Europe are submitted to the same regulations. It's not often the case. Mirror clause. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we preserve the interests of our players. And this is why we do advocate this concept of European preference. Because today, we are clearly attacked. One of the main challenges, if we want to deliver this agenda, is to be lucid on the current context. One of the main challenges of the European industry today, and in order to deliver this sovereignty agenda or this strategic autonomy, is about China. China has today overcapacities, is over-subsidizing a lot of sectors, and is literally killing a large part of the European industry. And we are clearly too slow to see that. But look at the automotive industry and the machine tool sectors. You are clearly a landslide approach of the Chinese. Last year, they destroyed literally 250,000 jobs in Germany. We are less impacted, by the way, because we disindustrialized in these sectors a decade ago. But we have to react to that. And the only way to react to that is to put regulation in order to protect these key sectors. The other regulation, but perhaps we will revert on that, is as well to protect our democracy. What we want to do on children and teenagers regarding the social platforms, what we want to do in order to regulate the social network.
Is European preference an answer to that, to the competition with China?
Definitely. Safeguard clause, European preference. You have to restore the level playing field. You need a fair competition. Each time the competition is unfair, you have to protect your economy. And protection is not protectionism. I'm a strong believer in free trade. But the current world order, when you look at trade, is no more about free trade. On one side, you have overcapacities and over-subsidies in China. On the other side, you have tariffs from the US. If we are in the middle, the only one to be naive and totally open and not to protect our industry, no chance to preserve it. And look at what the Chinese are doing on critical minerals, for instance, and rare earths. They are taking a lot of these capacities, killing the competition. When they still have competitors, they create dumping conditions to kill the existing capacities when they are in our hands. And when we are naive, our own producers go to the Chinese in order to be more competitive. If you don't have a European preference, a minimum percentage of European component, it's impossible to preserve our strategic autonomy. And when we speak about strategic autonomy, it's obviously about defense and security, but it's as well about industry, agriculture, technology, finance. Let
me end this part about the economy by asking you this. you know, all these like the capital market union and all these kind of reforms, to some people in this very fragmented political landscape, they seem like a design of the elite. They don't really, you know, mean anything to the average person. And we live in a very polarized world. So how do you convince people? You both have difficulties in that, in both countries. How do you convince them that this is a goal that you have to achieve that will make a difference in their own lives? Mr. Prime Minister?
Well, first of all, let me just build up on what Emmanuel said in terms of regulation, because it's also an indirect answer to what you just asked me. The 28th regime, the idea that you can have one legal construct applicable to startups through which they can operate in the entire European Union, was a recommendation by Enrico Letta, something which was enthusiastically supported by us and will become a reality very soon. This is an example, I would say, of smart deregulation, but also regulation at the European level. I've been a big proponent of picking our regulatory battles smartly vis-à-vis the US. I absolutely agree with Emmanuel, two areas of great focus. The first is the protection of children and teenagers from social media and from addictive scrolling. I expect that the momentum that has been built at the national level will also be transposed to the European level very soon. I think we need to send a very clear signal also to the big tech companies that there are certain things which are off limits, that they cannot make money from capturing our children's attention, because we know this is detrimental to their mental health. And the second battle, which we will fight, is preserving the public space. When people debated in Athens, even then you had fake news. You had rumors. You had to manage, you know, the challenges of populism. But what is happening now is clearly getting out of control. So having proper rules in terms of the public sphere, even in terms of anonymity, addressing the problem of artificial intelligence and the deep fakes which are already present in our debate, this is going to be a big challenge for all of us, especially those of us who will have elections in the upcoming future. Now, coming to your question, I think that we need to be aware and lucid in terms of what the people are telling us is their main concern. If their main concern is affordability, which it is, the high level of prices, we need to frame our debate through that lens. And we need to explain to people that by improving competitiveness, this means better paying jobs. This would mean that free trade means lower prices, that having a functioning market will promote European well-being to the point where we can continue to finance our unique European welfare state. So I think you're right in terms of not making these debates very technical and not using the traditional Brussels language, and to explain to people why, for example, you know, a free trade agreement can be good for our olive oil producers, because we are opening up the market for in India, for example, and that it will promote exports this way, and why supporting, you know, the startup ecosystem will mean bringing back, you know, French people or young Greeks from the US to actually work and build foundational AI models in Europe, because this means better wages, more productivity. So making this connection between the macro performance, what it means to improve productivity, and what this means for everyday people, it's critical. We've discussed this at the Council. When we talk about productivity, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. People are struggling today with prices, and the answer to that is better wages, lower taxes, but you can only do that if you improve the productivity.
Okay, Mr. President, how do you make people understand that this is, you know, they have to take ownership of these reforms as well?
The capital market union, it was your question.
One of them is the capital.
We can take this one. It seems to be super technical, but we tried to deliver during a decade, and it's not yet finished, a banking union, and now we launch this capital market union. We are fully aligned, and I think it's super important. Why? As Europeans, we have more savings than the Americans. This is true. But these savings, because of our regulation and the lack of integration of these capital market unions, goes to the financing of our bond market. So it finances the debt of the states and governments or our corporates. Or it goes to the US to finance the US innovation because they do have a powerhouse and a good capital market. Having a strong capital market as Europeans means having the capacity to put our savings at the right place to finance innovation and activity creation. This is what we have to explain. And all of us, we want to have the best innovation of this world. And at the same time, we want this affordability, we want to be part of the world, we want to create jobs, we want to have this innovation, and we want to be free and independent. If you get all these innovations by buying products made on the other side of the world because they had the capacity to invest in this innovation, you are losing something. And clearly there is no reason why, regarding the amount of savings we have, we are not able to channel properly these savings to the financing of innovation and equity. This is exactly what is at stake with the Capital Market Union. In order to do so, we have to simplify our regulation in order to build an actual European player, or a series of actual European players, but kill all the barriers and build a real European player. This is the only way, plus simplification, once again, of some regulation in order to allow these savings to be invested in innovation, in equity, and taking risks.
We have half an hour to cover a lot of issues. And then inevitably, we're coming to Trump at some point. You knew this was going to happen, I guess. Trump says that Europe is spoiled and that basically Europe has outsourced its defense to the US after the war. And the truth is, in Hormuz, we can see that Europe cannot undertake a mission by itself during war circumstances. And even in Ukraine, if there's going to be a security commitment by the Europeans, you cannot do this without the backstop by the US or air cover. How is this going to change?
First, we should not underestimate that this is a unique moment where a US president, a Russian president, a Chinese president are dead against the Europeans. So this is the right moment for us. Wake up. And if...
There have been many wake-up calls, Mr. President.
Yeah, but I mean, if we don't believe in ourselves, no chance that the others will say suddenly they are super guys. So we have to be a little bit self-confident and deliver an agenda. And let me disagree with you on Ukraine, taking the example. When the war started in February 22, a lot of people were skeptical about our capacity to react. But matter of fact, what happened? Day one, we took sanctions on Russia, unanimity. We are taking the 20th package. And the Russian economy is suffering from that. Don't believe the fake news. They are suffering. Day one, we expressed our clear solidarity to Ukraine in a clear framework. We don't want to be part of this war directly because this is dealing with a nuclear country close to our borders, but we will contribute and help the Ukrainians in their resistance war. And we did it. And we are number one investor by far as Europeans. Ukraine is resisting very well, much better than a lot of people thought. And the same, who are doubting about the capacity of the Europeans were those saying 6 months ago, Ukraine will collapse during winter time. They took even some territory from the Russians during the past few weeks. So we took sanctions, we remain all together. We provided a lot of support to the Ukrainian on finance, on capacities in the different fields. And third, we built for the very first time this coalition of the willing. And let me tell you, my contribution to the coalition of the willing is not, absolutely not, contingent to the US support or any US backstop. But what you have to see is that this coalition of the willing we launched in February last year as a reaction to this famous moment in the Oval Office with President Zelensky was a clear signal we are ready to take our fair part of this burden and we want to decide for ourselves. And this coalition of the willing, we launched it with the UK. All the Europeans are contributors, but we have Canada with us. We have Australia, New Zealand, Japan. Not just the EU, because you have as well Norway and the UK. And it is a very powerful first creation where, as Europeans, we are framework nations in order to organize such a defense and security contribution. The US is welcome. It's super important if they provide the monitoring on the front line. It's very highly appreciated if they provide the backstop. But we already decided to do so. And what I decided for France to do is not contingent to the American involvement.
But let me ask you both something. It's a mystery to me. Europe has Airbus. Airbus is a global success story. Why can't you work on a joint, fighter, next-generation fighter? I know you're very frustrated by this. You've been trying very hard to have European, cooperation on this. Why is this happening? Is it national egos? Is it business interest? What's the reason behind all this delay and all this hesitation?
Well, we're not building any fighters. We're just buying them. We'd just like to participate.
But you're right.
We'd just like to participate more in this project.
You have the same boats, right? You have the same frigates.
But this is a pretty good example of streamlining our purchases, getting better prices, having Greek shipyards contribute, and they can contribute more. I think it is a very, very good example of what we mean by streamlining standards and by obtaining economies of scale. You mentioned the example of Airbus, and I think it's a correct one. The problem is that our merger rules were simply looking at the single market. So we tried to prevent companies from becoming too big to take an advantage vis-à-vis other European players. This logic is completely outdated these days, in certain sectors at least. You remember there was a famous train merger that never happened because the European Commission at the time felt that it was a threat to the single market. But now we're competing with powerhouses. China, which is, as the President said, heavily subsidizing a series of sectors and is expanding in high-end manufacturing. And we should be perfectly lucid that the combination of AI and robotics at the scale at which is happening in China is a colossal threat to our entire manufacturing sector, not just the sectors where the Chinese are competing now. So we need to be aware of that. So change the merger rules and be more generous with European champions. For example, I mean, we are a medium-sized country. When Euronext came and wanted to buy our stock market, the opinion of the government was positive, because we understand that we need to be part of bigger companies in order to achieve scale. And when it comes to the next generation fighter, I really do hope that you will find a way to sort it out with the Germans, because it seems inconceivable to me, because we want to be part of this project, that we will be faced with a choice of choosing between two sixth-generation fighters. We don't have the luxury in Europe to do that. So I have full confidence in Emmanuel and Friedrich, because they know they take this very seriously. There are companies, of course. There's Airbus, there's Dassault, not always very easy to deal with. But I really think we need to twist their arm. We have to have one sixth-generation fighter.
Can you deliver on this front, Mr. President?
We have to deliver. And I think there is no... I mean, this is to be consistent with what we've said from the very beginning of this discussion. If you look at the global competition and the global order, what we need as Europeans is common standards, much more simplification. As long as we have 6 times, 7 times, 8 times more standards than the US, when you speak about missiles, fighter jets, and so on, there is no chance to be competitive in this world. So it goes through mergers, it goes through common projects, it goes through best athlete approach. We have several ways to do so. But we have to go beyond both the national interest and the company's interest, because this is a strategic issue. And for me, defense and security is a very good example of what we've discussed from the very beginning, how to have this strategic autonomy. To have strategic autonomy is to buy European and to produce as Europeans. And this is why. This is, by the way, what we are doing as well on submarines together. You decided to buy French submarines, and the Kimon is a great source of common pride, and we'll go tomorrow to this frigate together. But progressively, you will have more production on the Greek side, And this is as well a cooperation because it should be progressively a European production. And this is the way, as Europeans, to deal with this issue. A lot of countries didn't have a strong European industry. We cannot just ask them, stop buying Korean or Americans. We should say, you should buy European because this is the only way to be more independent. And the day we are disaligned with the Americans, for instance, you will make sure that you can still have your products, your arms, your munitions, your weapons. But you have to give them the fair share and to create as well industrial opportunities and upsides. And this is exactly what we are doing. And this is the main revolution, which is clearly on track as European scale, because we underestimate the fact that after the Second World War, defense and security was not an issue for the Europeans, or it was a forbidden topic for the Europeans. It was a national issue, and we were not supposed to cooperate at the scale of the European Union. And the big father was the US, and a big furnisher for a lot of countries. And what is changing progressively is the fact that we decide to have this common solidarity with common programs. So yes, we have to deliver.
Yeah, and if I may add, there's also a deep political dimension to this. I think President Trump, in his own way, was right back in 2017 when he said that Europe is not doing enough when it comes to defense. Greece was probably an exception in terms of our spending as a percentage of GDP for our own national reasons. But the truth is that we are spending much more now. But there is an additional dimension that goes beyond the industrial cooperation, and this has to do with our commitment to support European allies in case of a possible threat. What we did in Cyprus was a game changer, because essentially we responded to a request by a member state, which was attacked, and essentially we put we operationalized Article 42, paragraph 7 of the treaties, which is an article no one spoke about until a few years ago. We have a mutual assistance clause in our treaties, and this is our European responsibility. We never spoke about it because we thought that NATO would always do the job. And of course, NATO is there, and Article 5 is a credible deterrent. But what about those countries that are not members of NATO, such as Cyprus? So this is an opportunity to also send a signal that we need to take this article much more seriously. We need to look at the Cypriot lesson, think about what could happen in another case, have exercises in terms of what it would mean if we were again to offer support to a European country under threat. So this is a political statement that we don't just rely on NATO, and we're both of us NATO members, but we don't just rely on NATO, but there is also a stronger European dimension. And by the way, I think this is also good for NATO. I think rebalancing the relationship with the US inevitably will be the result of a stronger Europe. Otherwise, the relationship is going to be lopsided, and we will be eventually pushed around without being able to assert and defend our own positions.
We're down to the last 20 minutes. I want to ask you, with all respect, to keep our conversation a bit brief so we can cover a lot of things. You called NATO brain dead a long time ago. It was probably the right prophecy. I think NATO is now in the intensive care. You think it's going to survive? I mean, this morning we heard the Pentagon is thinking about kicking Spain out of NATO. Do you think there might be a European NATO? What is that going to look like?
I think first we had a wake-up call provided by President Putin in 2022, and it was the original objective of NATO. But it's clear that NATO is under pressure. First, because it's clear that the Europeans had to take their fair share of the burden, what Kyriakos just mentioned, and I agree with him, so everybody is spending more. And at the same time, there is now a doubt on the Article 5, not put on the table by the Europeans, but by the US president. And I mean, it's clearly de facto weakening the strength of the alliance. I think NATO is very useful, first for interoperability, second because it was a very interoperability of our equipment, our armies and so on, and it is a source of efficiency. And because it's a good strategic alliance, very useful for all of us. But I'm a strong believer in the European pillar of NATO. I advocated that years ago. As your Prime Minister mentioned, we together pushed forward this agenda of strategic autonomy, and this is where we are. So my view is that we have to strengthen this European pillar. We should not be the one to weaken NATO. We have to preserve NATO and its interoperability, but the Europeans have to be much stronger and work together and launch together common operations. And what we are ready to do in the Baltic Sea, in the Arctic region, vis-à-vis Russia on some security issues, on Ukraine with the coalition of the willing, in Eastern Mediterranean Sea with our common operations, on Hormuz Strait. It's not NATO operations. This is the Europeans working together and building common security solutions. So I really believe that what we are creating is a European pillar of NATO, but as well a European capacity of defense and security.
I'm trying very hard to find something you disagree on. So I'm going to ask this with a bit of hope that you might have a bit of disagreement, which is, you know, China is looming over the horizon. There is one school of thought which says Europe cannot deal with China without the US and vice versa. You seem to be thinking that Europe can do it on its own. Is that true?
I'm in favor of a de-risking strategy. I'm not in favor of any decoupling strategy. De-risking is very consistent with the strategy of being more independent or having more autonomy. De-risking is just to say when we have excessive dependencies, we have to fix it, either through diversification or through relocalization or more local production. And vis-à-vis China, we have excessive dependencies today on critical minerals and rare earths, on some green tech. And vis-à-vis the US as well, we have excessive dependencies. So I think the core agenda we should have is a de-risking strategy. I don't put an equal signal between US and China. We have the same values with the US, not with China. But I think what we should avoid is to rush on any decoupling strategy with China, because the result will be to increase our dependency to the US and to be seen the rest of the world are just the vassals of the US, which is not our future. And this is why I'm very much attached to this European independence. So vis-à-vis China, the de-risking strategy is feasible, but it's a 10-year strategy. We have to be very clear. We need this European preference. We have to put in place safeguard clause when they play on some sectors or they have excessive subsidies, as the Commission did on electrical vehicles, for instance. And we have to re-engage a new logic with China, which is to engage with them and to say, we don't believe in tariffs. We want to avoid the tariff with you because we think this is a bad answer. But to a relevant question, we do have imbalances. But we need more tech transfer and probably more direct investment on critical sectors where we can elaborate together. So I think this rebalancing and this de-risking strategy is feasible as Europeans, remaining engaged with the Americans, but not as vassals to the US. And I don't believe in a decoupling strategy vis-à-vis China.
Prime Minister?
Yeah, I'll take up a slightly different
Finally.
approach. We've had this debate at the European Council numerous times, whether the current US administration is essentially a continuation of previous administrations which had already sent us, clear signals that they were putting American interests as the absolute first priority, or whether it is something rather unique that could possibly change in the future. I happen to believe that at the end of the day, values, historical bonds do matter, and history is important. And the fact that the transatlantic relationship has endured and has created essentially the post-World War II order, which has been to the benefit of both the US and Europe, has left, is certainly something that we cannot easily discard. And I also do believe that the threat from China in terms of its ability to take over at a very fast speed sectors and put our own industrial base under pressure is a very, very real threat. So I do see potential for further win-win cooperation with the US, even if this seems difficult and complicated under the current administration. But I also do absolutely agree that we need to decide which are the key sectors where we need to commit serious public and private capital if we want to preserve our competitiveness and our strategic autonomy. We have not spoken about energy, but I do think that energy is absolutely critical for the well-being of our industry. You just look at the energy prices now. It is impossible for Europe and European industry to be competitive with these prices. Of course, we know the story. We were dependent on Russian gas. It was convenient, especially for some countries, but this is no longer the case. So we have to be quite realistic and ruthlessly pragmatic in terms of where we need to invest. I participated in a conference organized by Manuel on nuclear. It is inconceivable, and we are not a country that has civilian nuclear capabilities. But when I look at Europe, and I look at our ability to produce electricity cheaply, I see a combination of renewables and baseload power. And if we want to de-risk from natural gas, which we cannot produce at scale in Europe, and of course we want to move away from coal, which we have already done, by the way, in Greece, the only solution is to invest in nuclear. And we had nuclear. France built, tens of nuclear reactors, but we stopped at some point. So these are the sort of choices that we need to make. And we need to place some big bets. We cannot be all over the place. And this is just one example of those sectors, quantum, space, a certain dimension of AI, because it's difficult maybe to compete with the foundational models, but we need to...
Mr. Prime Minister, we're coming down to the last 10 minutes. I'm really sorry about this.
I'll stop.
It's a big world out there, I know. Mr. President, I want to ask you about the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2. And I wonder how challenging it is for somebody like you, because you seem to have a close relationship, which has its ups and downs, I guess. It's not so elegant moments, as you said from Korea. How difficult is that for you?
I take the leaders people give to us.
Yes.
And this is a philosophy we have to adopt. And I know President Trump very well, and I know he's a character, de facto. But I think, as Kyriakos just said, we have to be lucid on the US strategy. And it's not just President Trump's character or behavior. And the United States, I would say since now 15 years, decided number one issue is America, and America first. And I do respect that. And this is his main issue. He was elected to deliver for his main voters and American middle classes. Fair point. The second priority is China. And it started with President Obama, who said, I will be the first Pacific president. And it's quite consistent. And look at what happened during the former administration on Afghanistan or Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, it was not a pro-European approach. And this is not, sometimes President Trump is more explicit about the Europeans and could be more aggressive verbally. But their strategies just don't put the European interests at the center of their agenda. Okay, matter of fact. The point, I think we have to be, we are not here as leaders to make comments on tweets or behaviors. We are here to act and decide. And the unique strategy which makes sense for us, our countries and our continent is just to act, to accelerate, clearly to have more scale and speed, as I mentioned, in order to increase our independence. This is my obsession.
So you think if a more predictable, let's put it that way, US president is elected next time around, it's not going to be back to business as usual?
No, I don't think so. I think this is an historical trend. And I completely agree, by the way, with what Kyriakos said on the fact that we can engage with the US on some issues and still makes a lot of sense because of the common values and historical bonds. For instance, I do hope we will find a solution in the framework of our G7 on rare earths and critical minerals, because we have the same interest to de-risk ourselves from the Chinese over capacities and the fact that they have almost a monopoly on some rare earths. But I really believe that this US approach will last. And the main difference is probably during the first mandate, a lot of European countries were just looking at the Trump administration saying, okay, it will finish. So let's not change. We will resist. Now, a lot of colleagues are more lucid because after so many years, we say, okay, we have to react. We have to act as Europeans, to be more united, to defend ourselves, our own interests. And for me, this is the right direction.
You agree with that? Or?
Yes, I do agree, and I think we need to also be aware that the world is not just Europe, the US, and China. Look at the opportunities we have in terms of establishing a partnership with India. Look at the role we can play. Emmanuel alluded to this in his introductory comments, in the Gulf, where we are seen now as credible partners at a time when these countries cannot trust the US in the same way that they did maybe 2 months ago. Potential to team up with countries such as Canada, Australia, the democracies of Southeast Asia. So there is a story there which does not leave us alone. It's just, Europe, the US, and China, but it forge these sorts of partnerships which are based on principles and interests, of course. It's based on free trade, on rule of law, on freedom of navigation. What a critical topic now, and so important for us as a leading maritime nation. So I think we have the opportunity to also look beyond what is happening within Europe and to establish new strong alliances, which will create a de facto more multipolar world with different poles of different strength. But this is an important dimension that we need to work on.
Let me ask a Greek question because we only have, 4 minutes, and then I want to conclude with 2 general questions. I'll try to end on an optimistic note, the way you started. So I know you both love history, and I was reading the diaries of our former Prime Minister, now deceased, Konstantinos Karamanlis. And he said that in September 1975, he was having a meeting with Giscard d'Estaing in the Aegean on a boat, and he turned to him and said, we have a very visionist neighbor here in the Eastern Mediterranean. And he asked him very bluntly, what will France do if Greek sovereignty is challenged in the Aegean? So let me ask you the same question.
We will be here. And I think when you look at what we did in 2021 during the summertime, and what we did together with Cyprus a few weeks ago, and for me this is a definition of friendship. The famous alliance, if you referred, France-Greece alliance. This is it. The alliance and the friendship is a very simple thing. When you go to bed, you don't ask yourself, what will he do tomorrow? You know it. If your sovereignty is at risk, do what you have to do for you. We will be here.
Let me ask you now, you said something that leaders need to be practical, no more moral posturing, as you say very often in your speeches. So I want to ask both of you, if there was one thing you're going to change, institutional, in the economy or defense in Europe, within the next 5 years, a real deliverable, what would that be? Let me ask with you, Mr. Mitsotakis.
I would, again, focus, and it may seem trivial and mundane to come back to topics that we have discussed. The answers are all in the Draghi report.
One thing, just one.
One thing, energy. Making sure that we have a true energy union with low prices for energy across the union, invest in grids, invest in renewables, invest in nuclear, and make sure that we have competitive energy for our industry.
Mr. President?
As he will deliver this part, I can take a second one. Because he's right, it's a constant. I will take AI and quantum.
Okay. And now, sometimes we imagine you being in the Council, having discussions, especially informal discussions, where things that might look like group therapy in these very challenging times. So if this is a group therapy and we need to end it in a very optimistic way, I want you to give us one reason we have to be optimistic today about the future of Europe.
Look at us.
Okay.
But honestly speaking, look at what we achieved during the past decade. It never happened in our history, and we have the chance to be here, but we were the continent whose expertise was civil war. I mean, during centuries, we always had civil wars. And the initial project was a peace and prosperity project. We delivered the project. No more civil wars amongst Europeans. We should not underestimate this point. It's a unique creation. It's much more complicated. It seems to be super slow and complicated to a lot of people. But because this is a creation where 27 countries today work together without any hegemony. But we preserved peace on our continent. It never happened before. After that, we decided to make a common market, and we delivered prosperity. Now, we have to deliver geopolitical existence, I would say. And this is why we have to become a power, not just a peace place and a single market, but a geopolitical power. This is exactly what is at stake. But we delivered the first step. I mean, we wrote the first chapters. There is no reason we will be unable to write a new one. So yes, just be lucid on what we delivered all together. This continent is absolutely incredible in terms of civilization, in terms of strength, and our capacity to deal with our own complexity is incredible.
And we can be a real power without using our way of life and the welfare state and ourselves.
I say that with a lot of respect and friendship. In your country, you dealt with that, with a lot of courage 15 years ago. So it's clear that we will have to pass reforms. It will be very painful, and we will have to deal with other reforms in the future. But the magnitude of the reforms and what we have to do in order to deliver this agenda, I think, is totally feasible. The challenge for us, being democracies, is to convince our fellow citizens that this is the common interest. So my source of optimism is the journey we had all together and the capacity we have.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister?
If I were to put you on a plane and you would not know the destination, and you would land in any European capital, you would immediately understand that you're in Europe. Yeah. And there's something about our way of life that makes us attractive. Why do people want to come to Europe? Of course, there are issues of ensuring that our way of life is sustainable. We have a generous social model. We have free healthcare. We have less inequality. We still have more than we should, but we have less inequality than the US or even possibly China. So we like what we have. We're happy in Europe. It's just a question of, with the European way of life. It's just a question of making sure that this European way of life is sustainable. I've been at the Council, Emmanuel has been there for 9 years, I've been there for 7 years. We've taken massive decisions. COVID, Next Generation EU, Ukraine. Ukraine would not have been in a position it is now if it were not for European support. It would have lost the war if it were not for Europe. The same may be true for the US, but it is certainly true for Europe. So we have taken very, very important decisions, and we just need to learn from, from our the major historical figures. When the time comes, and when the crisis hits, and when we understand that we don't have time, we take the right decisions. And I'm sure this will happen again at the negotiations regarding the next multi-annual financial framework and the financial capabilities we have to do and implement all the ambitious agenda we spoke about today.
Well, Mr. President, I was watching President Trump the other day, and he was saying that people of Venezuela love him, and he's thinking that after his second term, if he will not have a third term, he will go to Venezuela and have a political career there. If you're thinking of along those lines, I can look at you in the eye and I can tell you Greece will be the place for you. And it's something that you have to think about. Thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alexis.
President Putin's way?
Εξοχότατε κύριε Πρόεδρε, με ιδιαίτερη χαρά σας καλωσορίζω στην Αθήνα και στο Προεδρικό Μέγαρο. Η παρουσία σας εδώ σήμερα και αύριο επισφραγίζει κάτι πολύ σημαντικό. Επισφραγίζει ιστορικούς δεσμούς των χωρών μας και μακρά σχέση φιλίας και συνεργασίας ανάμεσά μας. Αλλά είναι και κάτι άλλο, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Η παρουσία σας σηματοδοτεί την επέκταση και τη διεύρυνση αυτών των ιστορικών δεσμών και αυτών των φιλικών σχέσεων. Χάρη στη Συμφωνία Στρατηγικής Εταιρικής Σχέσης για την άμυνα και την ασφάλεια που θα υπογραφεί αύριο, αυτές οι σχέσεις διευρύνονται και επιπλέον έχουμε και άλλες συμφωνίες οι οποίες αναδεικνύουν την πολύπλευρη διμερή άριστη σχέση των χωρών μας, συμφωνίες που αφορούν άμυνα, οικονομία, πολιτική προστασία, καινοτομία και άλλα. Αυτή η σχέση, κύριε Πρόεδρε, δεν περιορίζεται στις μέρες μας, δεν περιορίζεται στην εποχή μας. Μίλησα για ιστορικούς δεσμούς. Ας πάμε 2 αιώνες πίσω. Πριν τη στρατηγική συμφωνία που έχουμε υπογράψει εδώ και 5 χρόνια στο Παρίσι, υπήρχε άλλη μια στρατηγική συνεργασία πριν καν η Ελλάδα αναγνωριστεί διεθνώς ως κράτος. Στο Ναβαρίνο η Γαλλία συμμετείχε στον Ενωμένο Στόλο, ο οποίος καταναυμάχησε τον Οθωμανικό Στόλο και υπήρξε αποφασιστικό βήμα στην επανάσταση της Ελλάδος κατά της Οθωμανικής Αυτοκρατορίας. 1 χρόνο μετά τον Ναβαρίνο, άλλη στρατηγική σχέση, το Γαλλικό Εκστρατευτικό Σώμα στην Πελοπόννησο και η Γαλλική Επιστημονική Αποστολή επίσης στην Πελοπόννησο, κύριε Πρόεδρε, έδειξαν πως αυτές οι σχέσεις έχουν μεγάλο ιστορικό βάθος. Και λίγα χρόνια μετά, η ίδρυση στην Αθήνα της Γαλλικής Σχολής, της πρώτης Γαλλικής Σχολής, η οποία ιδρύθηκε από τη χώρα σας, και της πρώτης Διεθνούς Ακαδημαϊκής Σχολής που δέχτηκε η Ελλάδα το 1846, δείχνουν ότι αυτή η σχέση που θα διευρυνθεί αύριο έχει ισχυρά θεμέλια. Συνεχίζοντας, τονίζω, κύριε Πρόεδρε, πως αυτή η φιλία και συνεργασία που μετουσιώθηκε σε συμμαχία δοκιμάστηκε πρόσφατα και στην πράξη και απέδωσε στην πράξη με αποκορύφωμα την συμβολή σας και τη συμμετοχή της Ελλάδος από κοινού με τη Γαλλία και άλλες ευρωπαϊκές χώρες ως ανταπόκριση στο αίτημα της Κύπρου για αμυντική συνδρομή. Εξοχότατε, κύριε Πρόεδρε, είμαστε μέσα σε ένα κόσμο γεμάτο αβεβαιότητα και πολλαπλές κρίσεις. Αλλά αυτή η σύμπλευση των 2 χωρών μας είναι βέβαιο, κύριε Πρόεδρε, ότι αποτελεί ένα υπόδειγμα σχέσης, αλλά ταυτόχρονα επιβεβαιώνει πως η στρατηγική αυτονομία της Ευρώπης μέσω τέτοιων διμερών σχέσεων μπορεί να κατακτηθεί. Βρισκόμαστε σε μια κρίσιμη περίοδο όπου η διεθνής ειρήνη, η διεθνής ένομη τάξη βάλεται, υπονομεύεται από αναθεωρητικές τάσεις και από αναθεωρητές, οι οποίοι μάλιστα, κύριε Πρόεδρε, είναι και μέλη του Συμβουλίου Ασφαλείας των Ηνωμένων Εθνών. Οπότε εμείς τι κάνουμε? Εμείς παραμένουμε προσιλωμένοι στην αξία και στην ανάγκη εφαρμογής του διεθνούς δικαίου. Και αυτή η προσήλωση είναι ο μόνος δρόμος ο οποίος μπορεί να οδηγήσει προς τη διεθνή ειρήνη, προς την ασφάλεια και την ευημερία του σύγχρονου κόσμου. Κύριε Πρόεδρε, στον περασμένο αιώνα, στις δεκαετίες του 60 και του 1970, σημαντικές, προβεβλημένες, ιστορικές προσωπικότητες των δύο χωρών μας εδραίωσαν τη σύγχρονη μορφή των διμερών μας σχέσεων. Ο Κωνσταντίνος Καραμανλής από πλευράς Ελλάδος, σε δύο φάσεις της πρωθυπουργίας του, ο στρατηγός Ντε Γκόλ εκ μέρους της Γαλλίας και ο Βαλερί Ζισκάρ ντ'Εστέν υπήρξαν τα πρόσωπα εκείνα που έχτισαν τα θεμέλια πάνω στα οποία η εξαιρετική μας σχέση βασίζεται. Και με αυτή τη διαπίστωση αυτής της εξαιρετικής σχέσης που βελτιώνεται συνεχώς και βελτιώνεται συνεχώς ακόμη και με την πριν από λίγα λεπτά φράση σας ότι η Γαλλία θα είναι εδώ για την Ελλάδα όποτε χρειαστεί. Αυτή η σχέση λοιπόν δυναμώνει με την παρουσία σας και θέλω να χαιρετήσω αυτή τη σχέση και αυτή σας τη στάση και να ευχηθώ, κύριε Πρόεδρε, οι αυριανές επαφές σας με την ελληνική κυβέρνηση να φέρουν άριστα αποτελέσματα προς όφελος όχι μόνο των δύο λαών, Γαλλίας και Ελλάδος, αλλά και προς όφελος του ευρωπαϊκού μας οικοδομήματος. Σας καλωσορίζω λοιπόν και εύχομαι κάθε επιτυχία στην αποστολή σας.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour votre accueil et pour les mots que vous venez d'avoir. Et vous avez parfaitement décrit à la fois la profondeur historique et l'intensité de la relation. Je voulais simplement ici redire combien la Grèce et la France sont liées par à la fois une amitié profonde et réciproque, je crois. Le philhellénisme a beaucoup compté dans l'histoire de France, dans sa littérature, sa philosophie. Il la nourrit. Et je crois que nos deux nations ont quelque chose de commun, c'est qu'elles pensent toujours au-delà d'elles-mêmes. Il y a un certain rapport à l'universel et l'universalisme qui nous lie de manière unique. Le XXe siècle ça conduit à des temps parfois difficiles, et votre pays en a en particulier éprouvé. Nous avons chacun connu nos drames, mais au fond, depuis ces dernières décennies, d'abord la France, la Grèce, l'Alliance est une histoire singulière depuis que la vie démocratique est ici revenue. Ensuite, l'aventure européenne qui nous lie. Et je crois que ces dernières années ont marqué un tour tout à fait nouveau dans ce désordre modèle que vous venez de caractériser très justement. C'est à la fois notre partenariat stratégique, ce qui a été fait en 2021 et après. Les avions, les frégates, notre solidarité, notre présence, notre ambition commune, notre affinité sur les questions européennes. Et c'est demain, en effet, ce partenariat stratégique mondial qui va permettre à la fois de consolider cette alliance en matière de défense et de sécurité, mais qui va aussi la compléter dans des tas de domaines. La culture, où nous sommes déjà évidemment très présents ensemble, la recherche, la science, la vie économique, l'énergie. Il n'y a aucun domaine qui va échapper à renforcement de notre partenariat stratégique, à la force de celui-ci. Et je crois que c'est vraiment une nouvelle ère qui s'ouvre, à la fois sur la relation bilatérale, évidemment sur les questions européennes où nous sommes affinitaires, dans la région, et vis-à-vis de l'ensemble des pays riverains de la Méditerranée, à l'égard desquels nous avons une politique commune. Et je veux ici dire aussi combien cela démontre que, en effet, la France est là, se tient à vos côtés face aux risques, aux menaces, et a envie d'avancer sur ce chemin d'avenir ensemble. En tout cas, je suis extrêmement reconnaissant de cet accueil, Monsieur le Président. Heureux d'être de retour à Athènes et d'être à vos côtés pour cette soirée. Merci beaucoup. Voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Δεν ξεχνάμε επίσης, κύριε Πρόεδρε,
μετουσιώθηκε σε μια ουσιαστική συμμαχία πριν 5 χρόνια. Έκτοτε η πολυεπίπεδη συνεργασία μας ενισχύεται και επεκτείνεται διαρκώς όπως θα καταδειχθεί και αύριο με την πληθώρα συμφωνιών που θα υπογραφούν. Εξοχότατε κύριε Πρόεδρε, στο νέο γεωπολιτικό περιβάλλον που αναδύεται ραγδαία, όπου σταθερές δεκαετιών αμφισβητούνται και η διεθνής νομιμότητα βάλεται παντεπόθεν, η ελληνογαλλική συμπόρευση αποτελεί υπόδειγμα συνεργασίας για όλη την Ευρώπη. Μια Ευρώπη που οφείλει πλέον να αναλάβει τις ιστορικές της ευθύνες, καθιστάμενη μια ισχυρή γεωπολιτική δύναμη. Διότι όπως πολύ σωστά είπατε πριν λίγα χρόνια, οι εποχές της ανεμελιάς αποτελούν παρελθόν. Το Φεβρουάριο συμπληρώθηκαν 4 έτη πολέμου στην Ήπειρό μας. Η Ελλάδα επέδειξε από την πρώτη στιγμή και χωρίς κανένα δισταγμό έπρακτε αλληλεγγύη στην Ουκρανία, τηρώντας στάση αρχών. Απέναντι στον παροχημένο αναθεωρητισμό και την ομοίβδια της ισχύως, η Ελλάδα προτάσει παντού και πάντα προσήλωση στις θεμελιώδεις αρχές του διεθνούς δικαίου, όπως η απαγόρευση κρίσης ή απειλής χρήσης βίας, ο σεβασμός στην κυριαρχία και την εδαφική ακεραιότητα των κρατών και η ειρηνική επίλυση των διεθνών διαφορών. Και δεν θα μπορούσε να πράξει διαφορετικά η Ελλάδα. Καθώς φέτος συμπληρώνονται 52 έτη από την εισβολή της Τουρκίας στην Κύπρο, η οποία άνοιξε μια χένουσα πηγή στο σώμα της Ευρώπης. Δεν ξεχνούμε ποτέ ότι το Κυπριακό είναι ζήτημα παράνομης εισβολής και κατοχής, από την οποία δεν πρόκειται να παραχθούν ένομα αποτελέσματα. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω θερμά για τη διαχρονική υποστηρικτική στάση της Γαλλίας προς την Κυπριακή Δημοκρατία και τις προσπάθειες για την εξέβρεση μιας βιώσιμης και λειτουργικής λύσης βάσει των αποφάσεων του Συμβουλίου Ασφαλείας των Ηνωμένων Εθνών αλλά και του Ευρωπαϊκού Κεκτημένου. Ενώ ο πόλεμος εξακολουθεί να μένεται στην Ευρώπη, ένα ακόμη πολλαπλό μέτωπο έχει ανοίξει από το 2023 στην ευρύτερη Μέση Ανατολή, θέτοντας σε κίνδυνο όχι μόνο την περιφερειακή σταθερότητα, αλλά την ενεργειακή και οικονομική ασφάλεια της Ευρώπης. Στη χαοτική σημερινή συγκυρία θα ήθελα να εκπέμψω μήνυμα αυτοσυγκράτησης, σύνεσης, καθώς και συμπαράστασης στα χιλιάδες αθώα θύματα του πολέμου, μεταξύ των οποίων είναι και οι χριστιανοί της Μέσης Ανατολής. Είναι σαφές ότι η λύση στα χρόνια προβλήματα της περιοχής δεν μπορεί παρά να προέρθει μόνο από το διάλογο και τη διπλωματία. Σε αυτό το περιβάλλον αλλεπάλληλων κρίσεων, η Ευρώπη βιώνει πρωτόγνωρες προκλήσεις που δοκιμάζουν τη συνοχή της ως ένωσης κρατών, αλλά και την ανθεκτικότητα των ίδιων των κοινωνιών μας. Το μεταναστευτικό, η ραγδαία τεχνολογική πρόοδος, η ενεργειακή επισφάλεια, η οικονομική αστάθεια, η άνοδος των άκρων, οι υβριδικές απειλές και η κλιματική κρίση συνιστούν συνθήκες που ενδεχομένως να ενταθούν τα επόμενα χρόνια. Κανένα ευρωπαϊκό κράτος δεν μπορεί να αντιμετωπίσει από μόνο του αυτές τις απειλές, ούτε να αδράξει τις ευκαιρίες που παρουσιάζονται. Η Ευρώπη λοιπόν οφείλει να κινηθεί ταχαίως με συντονισμένα βήματα, τόσο προς τη στρατηγική της αυτονομία, όσο και προς τη διεύρυνσή της, προκειμένου να διαδραματίσει τον ιστορικό της ρόλο ως φάρος δημοκρατίας, ειρήνης και ευημερίας. Εξοχότατε κύριε Πρόεδρε, κατά τα προηγούμενα χρόνια, δεκαετίες, αιώνες, η πορεία μας διασταυρώθηκε ξανά και ξανά. Σήμερα χαράσουμε συνεταγμένα τη σύμπλευσή μας στη βάση κοινών αξιών, συμφερόντων και οράματος. Ελλάδα και Γαλλία μοιράζονται κοινές αντιλήψεις για την διμερή τους σχέση, για την ευρωπαϊκή ολοκλήρωση. αλλά και για την πορεία που η διεθνής κοινότητα οφείλει να ακολουθήσει στο μέλλον. Και αυτό μας γεμίζει αισιοδοξία και αποφασιστικότητα για τις ειρηνικές μάχες που καλούμαστε να δώσουμε μαζί. Με τις σκέψεις αυτές, υψώνω, κύριε Πρόεδρε, το τήρι μου και εύχομαι σε εσάς και στο φίλο λαό της Γαλλίας ειρήνη, ασφάλεια και ευημερία.
Monsieur le Président de la République hellénique, Madame, Monsieur le Premier ministre, Mesdames, Messieurs les ministres, Messieurs les parlementaires, Mesdames et Messieurs au programme de qualité, Hélas, Galia, Simaria. Ce slogan Grèce, France, Alliance fut scandé par les Grecs lors du retour de Constantinos Karamanlis dans l'avion présidentiel français après une décennie d'exil à Paris, et il est aujourd'hui au fond plus à propos que jamais. Votre invitation de ce soir nous honore, Monsieur le Président, et elle s'inscrit dans la continuité d'une longue histoire, celle des visites qui ont marqué l'amitié entre nos deux pays, celle du général de Gaulle en 1963, ou encore celle de Valéry Giscard d'Estaing en 1975, premier chef d'État à rendre visite au Premier ministre Karamanlis après le retour de la démocratie en Grèce. Car la première idée d'origine, la France s'est faite la principale défenseuse de la vocation européenne. Tous les présidents français, je le crois, et tous les Français, sont en effet depuis toujours animés par l'idée que l'Europe, sans la Grèce, ne serait pas l'Europe. D'abord, ce fut par la volonté de consolider le retour de la démocratie dans le pays qui en fut le berceau. Ensuite, par un sentiment tenace de solidarité venu de loin et qui ne s'est guère démenti lorsque l'histoire se fit il y a 15 ans notamment, tumultueuse pour vous et pour nous tous européens. La profondeur de ce lien, vous l'avez rappelé un instant, Monsieur le Président. Chacun ici la connaît, elle remonte à l'Antiquité, le fil hellénisme qui a nourri la pensée française, sa littérature comme sa philosophie. Au fond, cette complicité qui a fait que vous avez inventé les Jeux Olympiques, il a fallu un Français pour les réinventer. Ça me dit du soutien français à votre lutte pour l'indépendance aussi, nourrit d'une soif de justice, une admiration historique, celle de ces combattants français volontaires, de Navarin à la Morée, celle des intellectuels, des artistes qui les aident, tous animés par les mots de Byron, Chateaubriand, Hugo, les pinceaux de Delacroix, présents jusque dans votre bureau. Et la Grèce sur les ruines, selon nous, qui a voyagé cette année jusqu'à cette ville des Tours, qui figure ainsi la grande, en quelque sorte, comme la grande sœur de notre liberté guidant le peuple, et celle, en quelque sorte, le destin de nos deux nations unies par le même groupe de la liberté. Sont venues plus tard les épreuves de la guerre civile et de la dictature, et là aussi la France a fait sienne les enfants de la Grèce. Et ils le l'ont bien rendu, mettant tout le génie créatif de leur pays d'origine au service de son rayonnement, Costa Gavras, à Cornelius Castoriadis, et tant de destins scellés présents autour de ces tables. Et je veux ici les en remercier. La France n'oublie pas nous. Les milliers de Grecs qui se sont portés volontaires pour la défendre. Des tranchées de la Grande Guerre jusqu'aux armées de la libération, avec toujours cette même volonté de se tenir côte à côte lorsque nos valeurs de liberté et de démocratie sont menacées. Cette histoire commune est profondément européenne. Nous fêtons cette année l'anniversaire de l'adhésion de la Grèce à la communauté économique européenne, 45 ans de fidélité, de solidarité, unis par cet idéal de liberté universelle. 45 ans d'admiration mutuelle, résolument méditerranéenne mais aussi européenne. Et sur ce socle historique, nous bâtissons l'avenir. Nous le bâtissons en étant côte à côte dans les temps difficiles, le bâtissons en ayant aussi la même volonté d'innovation, de technologie, de culture, de défense et de sécurité. Je dois dire à quel point les deux pays, je pense qu'on voit que M. le Premier ministre, sont, comme on le dit, affinitaires sur tant de sujets. Et nous le faisons aussi avec beaucoup de respect et d'admiration pour le chemin parcouru par notre pays durant les 15 dernières années. Le succès économique grec est admirable à tous égards. Il s'est bâti sur des sacrifices réels, nul n'oublie. Mais il force le respect de toute l'Europe et a rendu l'Europe elle-même plus forte. Le succès incarné symboliquement depuis quelques semaines par votre présidence de l'euro que la France a soutenu. Alors vous avez tout dit des tumultes actuels du monde et vous ne pouvez pas être plus long, Monsieur le Président. Et au fond, en effet, depuis 2021, nous avons construit un partenariat nouveau au service de votre sécurité, de notre souveraineté, conscient aussi que lorsque la glace peut être menacée, c'est l'Europe tout entière qui est, et la France aussi. Demain, nous allons ensemble renforcer ce partenariat en lui donnant un visage nouveau, continuant à renforcer l'union en matière de sécurité et de défense, mais aussi de culture, d'économie, d'innovation. Aucun champ n'échappera à ce qui va être scellé demain, et surtout vous aurez à nourrir. Et je le dis ici devant les plus éminents représentants de nos industries, de notre économie, de notre défense, de notre culture, qui sont présents autour de ces tables. Et vous aurez à le faire parce qu'au fond, notre destin est scellé depuis tant de siècles. Mais les conclusions que vous avez parfaitement décrites le rendent plus vivant. Alors, j'avais un discours beaucoup plus élaboré, que je l'ai dit tout à l'heure avec le Premier ministre, nous revenons demain, et vous avez parfaitement dit les choses, Monsieur le Président, je m'inscris dans vos propos, parce que je vois les chandeliers qui sont progressivement consumés par la bougie, et je ne voudrais pas retarder davantage ce dîner, et en voyant cette image, je me reviens simplement pour vous dire les choses avec des mots spontanés. Une image que j'ai souvent convoquée, qui est dans l'idée, je peux dire qu'elle se dit vraiment. Il va un jour chez elle, pour la retrouver, c'était son amour. Et alors qu'elle est absente, il écrit que la bougie progressivement se consume. Et il écrit avec frénésie, noircit les pages. Et à un moment, la bougie se consumant, il me voit tout terre. Et il a cette phrase pour lui dire, je ne sais pas si j'écris encore sur la page, mais partout vous n'arriverez pas à me lire, vous disait simplement quelque chose. Alors que tous les mots que je n'ai pas prononcés ce soir sont au-delà de tous les grands discours. Je voudrais simplement que vous êtes tous ici, en classe, vous sachiez une chose très profonde. C'est qu'au-delà de tous les mots que je n'ai pas prononcés ce soir pour la vie, n'oubliez jamais que les Français vous aiment. Et que vive l'amitié entre nos deux